I was staring at a photograph from 3 years ago when I realized someone had stolen 6 feet of my property. The photo showed my son standing next to our western fence line during his high school graduation party, the old oak tree clearly inside my yard by a good margin. Now that same tree sat almost flush with the fence posts. I walked outside with my phone, held up the image, and felt my stomach drop. The fence hadn't moved. The property stakes had. I live in Bonner County, Idaho, just outside Sandpoint, where the roads turn to gravel, and people still believe in minding their own business. Or they used to. 5 years back, developers bought the surrounding farmland and carved it into half-acre lots, slapped up cookie sea-cutter houses, and formed the Clearwater Ridge Homeowners Association. I'd bought my 3 acres decades earlier, back when this was just forest and field, but somehow I'd ended up grandfathered into their jurisdiction when they redrew district lines. The HOA had been a minor annoyance at first, just another monthly bill and some rules about fence colors. Then Karren Dunmore got elected board president. Karren was 52, bottle blonde, and possessed the kind of determination that came from having nothing better to do than meditate on her neighbor's failings. She drove a white Escalade with vanity plates that read "Clarify," and she treated HOA violations like personal insults to her family name. Last summer, she'd fined old Morton Henderson $300 because his mailbox was 4 inches too tall. The man was 86. I studied the ground where my stakes should have been. Fresh grass grew there now, the kind that comes in rolls from a landscaping company. Beyond it, taking up what used to be my western strip, sat a new flower garden with a carved wooden sign that read "Clearwater Ridge Community Welcome Garden" in flowing script. The garden hadn't been there 4 months ago. I'd been away most of the fall, visiting my daughter in Boise while she recovered from surgery, and apparently that's when they'd made their move. My hands were shaking. Not from anger yet, just from the pure audacity of it. They'd moved my property stakes, stolen 6 feet along my entire western boundary, and planted flowers on my land like it had always been theirs. I spent that evening digging through my files until I found the original survey from when I'd purchased the property in 1998. The measurements were clear, the stakes marked with orange flagging and iron pins driven deep. I'd paid good money for that survey. I grabbed a metal detector from my garage and went back outside in the fading light. It took me 40 minutes, but I found them. The original iron pins were still in the ground, buried under 6 inches of imported topsoil, exactly 6 feet west of where my current fence stood. Someone had pulled up my visible stakes, marked new ones closer to my house, and literally covered the evidence. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table, looking at survey documents and property deeds, trying to figure out how they'd thought they could get away with this. The answer came at 2 a.m. when I found the letter buried in my mail stack. It was dated September 15th, while I'd been in Boise, printed on HOA letterhead with Karren Dunmore's signature at the bottom. "Dear homeowner," it began. "As part of the Clearwater Ridge Beautification Initiative, the board has authorized a community garden along the western perimeter. A professional survey team has confirmed the precise boundaries to ensure full compliance. Thank you for your cooperation in making our community more beautiful." Professional survey team. They'd brought in their own surveyors, gotten the results they wanted, and moved my stakes while I was gone. This wasn't a mistake. This was theft with paperwork. I was at the county courthouse in Sandpoint when they opened at 8 the next morning. The Bonner County Administration Building was a practical 2-story structure on Main Street, all brick and efficiency. I'd been inside twice before, once for a building permit and once to file my property taxes. The clerk at the front desk directed me to the second floor, where the planning and zoning department kept their records. That's where I met Jennifer Garrett. She was bent over a wide table, covered in maps when I walked into the GIS office. Her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up when I cleared my throat, and I noticed her eyes were the color of the lake on a clear day, that particular shade of blue that seems almost gray until the light hits it right. "Can I help you?" she asked, straightening up. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt under her county ID badge. I guess she was in her early 40s, around my age, with the kind of face that suggested she smiled often but wasn't doing it right now because she was concentrating. "I need to see the official plat map for my property," I said. "Someone's been playing games with my boundary stakes, and I need to know what the county records actually show." Her expression shifted, becoming more focused. "Property address." I gave her the information, and she moved to a computer station, her fingers quick on the keyboard. "Ethan Oaks, right? 3.2 acres on Clearwater Ridge Road. That's me." She pulled up a digital map, then zoomed in on my parcel. The boundaries showed clear on the screen, marked with precise measurements and bearing angles. She studied it for a moment, then looked at me with new interest. "Tell me about these games." I explained the whole thing while she listened, her attention never wavering. When I described finding the buried iron pins, her jaw tightened. "They moved your stakes 6 feet. The entire western boundary, 6 feet, 2 inches at the northern corner, 5 feet 11 inches at the southern. I measured 3 times. She was quiet for a moment, then turned back to her computer. "Do you know when they did their survey? I should have a record if they filed it." Letter said September 15th, but it was probably earlier. Her fingers flew across the keyboard again, accessing databases I didn't understand. After a few minutes, she shook her head. "Nothing filed." If they hired a licensed surveyor, they're required to file the results with the county within 30 days. There's no record of any new survey on your property or the adjacent HOA parcels since 2019. So they just moved them, without an actual survey. It looks that way. Which would be survey tampering under Idaho Code 18-702. That's a misdemeanor, potentially a felony if the value of the disputed land exceeds $1,000. She stood up, grabbed a notepad. 6 feet along how much frontage? 412 feet, give or take. She did the math in her head. That's over 2,000 square feet. At current land values in this area, probably worth $8,000 to $10,000. Definitely felony territory. She looked at me directly then, and I saw something that might have been anger in those lake blue eyes. "This really bothers me. Property boundaries aren't suggestions. They're legal documents, recorded and protected. When people mess with them, they're messing with the entire system. So what do I do? First, I print you a certified copy of your official plat map. That's the legal record. Then you might want to hire your own surveyor to document everything and probably talk to a property attorney." She paused. "And if you want, I can come out and GPS the corners myself. It's not official, but our equipment is accurate to within 2 inches. At least you'd know for certain where the county thinks your boundaries are. You do that." She smiled then, and it changed her whole face. "I'm the GIS technician. Managing spatial data is literally my job. Plus, I really hate it when people mess with property lines. It's like lying in math. Just fundamentally offensive." We arranged for her to come by the next evening after her shift ended. She'd bring the county's GPS equipment, and we'd mark every corner of my property. I left the courthouse with a certified plat map, and something I hadn't expected. Hope that maybe I wasn't alone in this fight. Jennifer showed up at 5:30 the next afternoon driving a county pickup truck with surveying equipment in the bed. She changed out of her office clothes into work boots and a canvas jacket, and she hauled the GPS unit out like she'd done it 1,000 times. Probably had. "Show me where you found the original pins," she said. I took her to the western boundary, to the spot where I dug through the topsoil. She set up the GPS unit with quick efficiency, extending the antenna on its telescoping pole and waiting for the receiver to lock onto satellites. When it beeped, she took a reading, then pulled out a tablet and compared it to the Plat map. "Your pin is exactly where it should be," she said. "Right on the recorded boundary. The fence is 6 feet into your property." We walked the entire western line, taking readings at 5 points. Every single one confirmed what I already knew. Then Jennifer did something I hadn't expected. She turned east and started GPS marking the HOA's common areas. "What are you doing?" I asked, just curious about something. She walked toward the entrance of Clearwater Ridge, where a large wooden welcome sign arched over the main road. The sign was elaborate, with stone pillars on either side and landscaped beds full of ornamental grasses. She took a reading at the north pillar, checked her tablet, and her eyebrows went up. "Well, that's interesting." "What?" "This sign isn't on HOA property. The northern pillar is on county right-of-way, and the southern one is about 3 feet onto your land. Looks like when they designed their entrance, they didn't bother checking where their actual boundary was." I walked over and looked at her screen. The property lines were overlaid on the satellite image, and she was right. The entire entrance structure straddled the boundary between the public road easement and my property. None of it sat on the land the HOA actually owned. "How did they get a building permit for that?" I asked. "I don't think they did. Let me check." She made a phone call, spoke briefly with someone in the planning office, then hung up. "No permit on file for this structure. They just built it." We stood there in the cooling evening air, looking at the sign. It had to have cost $20,000 at least. Custom carved wood, stone masonry, professional landscaping, solar lights in the pillars. The pride of Clearwater Ridge, visible from the main road, welcoming residents home, and it was built in the wrong place. Jennifer was thinking the same thing I was. I could see it in her face, the way her gaze kept moving from the sign to her tablet and back again. "The Plat is the legal record," she said quietly. "It doesn't matter what they built or where they thought the boundary was. What matters is what's recorded at the courthouse. So technically, they built this on my land and public right-of-way. Technically nothing. They did build it on your land and public right-of-way, without permission and without a permit." She looked at me. "You could force them to move it." The idea settled over me like a physical weight. They'd stolen 6 feet of my property, and in doing so, they'd made a mistake that could cost them their entire entrance. The asymmetry of it was beautiful. They'd taken 2,000 square feet from me. I could take the face of their entire development. "I need to think about this," I said. Jennifer nodded. "If you decide to pursue it, you'll need a lawyer and an official survey. I can't be directly involved in any legal action. What I did tonight was help a property owner verify his boundaries, which is part of my job. But if this goes to court, I'm a county employee. I have to stay neutral." "I understand." She packed up her equipment as the sun set behind the mountains. Before she left, she hesitated by her truck. "For what it's worth, I think you should go after them. Not because of the entrance, even though they deserve that, but because they moved your stakes. That's not a mistake or a misunderstanding. That's deliberate fraud, and if they get away with it on your property, they'll do it to someone else." I watched her drive away, then turned back to look at the Clearwater Ridge entrance sign glowing in the dusk. Karren Dunmore's beautification project. The crown jewel of her board presidency, built in the wrong place. I barely slept again that night, but this time it wasn't from anger. I was planning. I pulled every document I had, organized them chronologically, and started making a timeline. The HOA had been formed in 2019. The entrance sign had gone up in 2021. My stakes had been moved sometime between August and September of 2024 while I was in Boise. The community garden appeared in October. At 7 a.m., I called a property attorney in Coeur d'Alene named Marcus Webb. His website said he specialized in boundary disputes and real estate law. His receptionist put me through after I explained the situation. "Let me make sure I understand," Webb said after I'd laid it all out. "They moved your boundary stakes to steal 6 feet, built a garden on the stolen land, and their entrance structure is actually on your property and public right-of-way." "That's correct." "And you have GPS data from the county confirming all of this?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Oakes, I've been practicing property law for 23 years, and I've never seen a case with this much ammunition. When can you come to my office?" We met that afternoon. Webb was in his 60s, with steel gray hair and the careful manner of someone who'd learned to think 3 moves ahead. He reviewed all my documents, made copies, and asked detailed questions about the timeline. "Here's what we're looking at," he said finally. "First, we hire our own surveyor to officially document everything. I know someone good, licensed and bondable. He'll confirm the original boundaries and document the stake tampering. Second, we file a quiet title action to formally establish your property lines and remove any cloud on your title. Third, we notify the HOA that they've built structures on your land without permission and demand removal or compensation. What about criminal charges for moving the stakes? We can file a complaint with the sheriff's office for survey tampering. Whether they prosecute is up to the prosecutor, but with clear evidence, I'd say it's likely. Idaho takes property rights seriously." He leaned back in his chair. "The entrance is your leverage. They moved your stakes to steal 6 feet. Fine. But in doing so, they exposed that their showcase entrance is completely off the Plat. Moving that structure will cost them $50,000 or more, plus they'll have to redo all the landscaping. You're in a position to negotiate a very favorable settlement. What if I don't want to settle?" Webb smiled. "Then we go to court, get a judgment establishing the true boundaries, and force them to relocate everything at their expense. You could also sue for the value of the land they stole, treble damages for intentional trespass, and attorney fees. You'd probably win all of it. But litigation takes time. A year, maybe more." "I want them to understand they can't do this," I said. "They can't just move stakes and steal land because someone's not paying attention." "Then we do this properly. We document everything, we file the necessary actions, and we let the law work. The Plat is on your side. That's the nuclear weapon in property disputes. Once we establish that their entrance is off the Plat, they'll have no choice but to move it." I hired him that afternoon. The surveyor, a man named Tom Rodriguez, came out 3 days later with his equipment and crew. They spent 6 hours on my property, locating the original iron pins, documenting the moved stakes, measuring everything twice. Rodriguez was methodical and thorough, and when he finished, he looked angry. "Whoever moved these stakes knew what they were doing," he told me. The new stakes were set with concrete, marked with flagging, made to look official. But they're in the wrong place by 6 feet, and there's no surveyor's cap on them, no license number. This was deliberate deception. His official report ran to 30 pages with photos, measurements, and technical drawings. It confirmed everything Jennifer's GPS readings had shown. My boundary was where the original 1998 survey said it was. The current fence was 6 feet inside my property line. The HOA garden occupied my land, and the Clearwater Ridge entrance sat partially on the county right-of-way and partially on my property. With none of it on the land the HOA actually controlled. Marcus Webb filed the quiet title action on November 18th. The paperwork was served to Karren Dunmore and the HOA board on November 22nd, 3 days before Thanksgiving. I wasn't there when Karren got the papers, but I heard about it from my neighbor, Paul Chen. She went ballistic, Paul told me over the phone, screaming about harassment and frivolous lawsuits. She called an emergency board meeting for tonight. Did she say anything about the entrance? Not directly, but everyone's talking about it. Word got out that the sign might be in the wrong place. People are worried. The emergency meeting was held at the community center, a prefab building near the entrance. I wasn't invited, but it was technically an HOA meeting, which meant it was supposed to be open to residents. I showed up at 7 p.m. and walked in like I belonged there. Karren was at the head of the table, looking like she'd aged 5 years in 5 days. Her makeup was perfect, but her eyes were hard. The 4 other board members sat around her, all of them holding copies of the legal filing. The room fell silent when I entered. "You're not welcome here," Karren said. "It's an open meeting. I'm a resident." I took a seat in the back row. She looked like she wanted to argue, but the board treasurer, a nervous man named Plat, touched her arm. "Let's just get through this," he said quietly. Karren spent 20 minutes ranting about my lawsuit, calling it everything from a money grab to a personal vendetta. She insisted the HOA had done everything properly, that they'd hired professionals, that the beautification project was legal and appropriate. "This is clearly harassment from someone who doesn't understand property law," she said. "Our attorney has reviewed the case and believes we have strong grounds for dismissal." That was news to me. If they had an attorney, Webb hadn't mentioned it. What about the entrance? Someone called from the audience. "Is it true the sign is in the wrong place?" Karren's face hardened. "There's been some question about the exact placement, but I'm confident that once the professionals review the matter, it will be resolved in the HOA's favor. The sign is not moving." I didn't say anything. I just sat there and let her dig herself deeper. After the meeting ended, several residents approached me in the parking lot. Most were curious. A few were angry, but one woman, an older resident named Margaret Sullivan, took my hand. "I'm glad you're doing this," she said quietly. "Karren's been out of control for 2 years. Maybe this will finally rein her in." I drove home feeling like I'd crossed a line. This wasn't just about my 6 feet anymore. It was about the HOA, about Karren's management, about whether one person could just decide to redraw boundaries because it suited her vision. Jennifer called me that night around 9. "I heard about the meeting. You okay? How did you hear about it? Small county. People talk. Especially when there's drama about property lines." She paused. "I've been thinking about your case, officially or unofficially, very unofficially, after hours on my own time. I heard papers rustling. I went back through the HOA Plat records, the original subdivision filing from 2019. The entrance was supposed to be built on Lot A, which is a common area parcel owned by the HOA. But when I overlay the actual construction on the Plat map, it's about 8 feet too far north and 3 feet too far west. I think what happened is they graded the road approach and just built the entrance where it looked good without actually checking the survey markers. So it was incompetence, not malice. For the entrance, probably. But moving your stakes, that was malice. They realized their garden project would look better with more space, saw you were gone, and took it. She was quiet for a moment. I pulled the permit history for the whole subdivision. Karren Dunmore has been on the board since 2020, board president since 2022. In that time, They've done 4 major common area projects. None of them had proper permits or surveys. She runs that HOA like her personal fiefdom. Why are you digging into this? Because it bothers me. Property records are supposed to mean something. They're the foundation of ownership in this country. When people like Karren treat them as optional, it undermines the whole system. She sighed. And because I like you, you're fighting for something that matters. We talked for another hour. She explained the intricacies of Plat law, how recorded maps took precedence over physical markers, how counties maintained the official record, but relied on property owners to enforce their own boundaries. She talked about her job, how she'd started as a planning intern and worked her way up to senior GIS technician. She'd been married once, divorced 5 years ago, no kids. She loved maps the way some people loved art, seeing the world as layers of data and meaning. Most people think maps are boring, she said. But maps are stories. Every property line represents a decision someone made, a negotiation, a dream of what they'd build. When I look at the county plat, I see the history of every family that settled here. What do you see when you look at my property? I asked. I see someone who bought 3 acres when this was still wilderness, who built a house and raised kids here, who trusted that the law would protect what was his. She paused. I see something worth fighting for. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about maps and boundaries and the woman who cared about them enough to help a stranger. I'd been alone since my wife died 8 years ago, focused on my kids and my work as a freelance carpenter. I hadn't thought much about companionship or connection, but Jennifer's voice on the phone had stirred something I'd thought was settled. Interest, attraction, the possibility of something more. The HOA's attorney responded to our filing on December 3rd. His name was Bradley Hutchins, and his response was predictably aggressive. He argued that my survey was defective, that the HOA had acted in good faith based on professional advice, and that my claims should be dismissed. He also filed a counterclaim alleging that I was harassing the HOA and demanding sanctions. Marcus Webb laughed when he read it. This is boilerplate intimidation. He's hoping you'll get scared and back down. We'll file a reply pointing out that the plat is the plat, and unless he can show that the county recorded it wrong, his client has no leg to stand on. What about their claim that they relied on professional advice? They'd have to produce that professional. Who was the surveyor? Where's the report? Why wasn't it filed with the county? The more questions we ask, the clearer it becomes that no licensed surveyor ever told them to move your stakes. Someone on that board just decided to do it. While the legal paperwork flew back and forth, I worked on documenting everything. I took photos of my property every day, marked the true boundaries with new stakes set in concrete, and kept detailed records of every interaction with the HOA. I also filed a criminal complaint with the Bonner County Sheriff's Office. Detective Sarah Paulson took my statement on December 10th. She was in her 40s, professional and thorough, and she listened to the whole story without interrupting. "Survey tampering," she said when I finished. "We don't see that often, but when we do, it's usually messy. You have proof that the original stakes were moved." My surveyor documented everything. The original iron pins are still in the ground. The new stakes are 6 feet off, and they're not marked with any surveyor's license number. She made notes on her tablet. "I'll need to talk to your surveyor and review the evidence. If what you're saying is accurate, we'll open an investigation. The prosecutor will decide whether to file charges, but Idaho code is clear. Moving boundary markers with intent to defraud is a felony." "How long will that take?" "Investigations like this can take months. We have to interview witnesses, review documents, establish intent. but I'll make it a priority. Property crimes might not be as flashy as other cases, but they matter just as much. Jennifer and I had dinner that week at a small Italian place in Sandpoint. It wasn't officially a date, just two people who'd been talking on the phone every night meeting for a meal. But it felt like more. She wore a blue sweater that matched her eyes, and when she smiled at something I said, I felt 16 years old again. "Tell me about your family," she said over pasta. "Two kids. My daughter Emily is 30, lives in Boise, works as a nurse. My son David is 27, just finished grad school in Montana. My wife Susan died from cancer 8 years ago, pancreatic, 6 months from diagnosis to the end." I took a breath. I stayed on the property because it's where we built our life, couldn't imagine leaving. "I'm sorry," Jennifer said, and she meant it. "That must have been unbearable." It was. "But you survive because you have to. The kids needed me to be stable, so I was stable." And after a while it got easier. Not good, but easier. I looked at her. "What about you? You said you were divorced 5 years ago. He was a good man, but we wanted different things. He wanted kids and a big social life. I wanted quiet and maps," she smiled. "That sounds ridiculous." "It doesn't. I understand wanting quiet." We talked until the restaurant was closing, then sat in her car in the parking lot for another hour. She told me about growing up in Spokane, about studying geography in college because she loved the precision of it. She'd come to Bonner County for a job and stayed because the mountains felt like home. "I've been thinking about your case constantly," she admitted. "Not just the legal parts, the principle of it. You're fighting for something that matters, and I want to help, but I have to be careful. If the HOA's attorney argues that I misused county resources or showed favoritism, it could cost me my job. I don't want you taking that risk. I know. But I'm taking it anyway. After hours on my own time, I've been building a comprehensive map of the entire Clearwater Ridge development. Every structure, every improvement, every easement, cross-referenced with the official plat and the permit records. Why? Because I want to know the full scope of what Karren's done, and because mapping is how I solve problems. When I can see all the data laid out, the patterns become clear. She pulled out her tablet and showed me. The map was beautiful, layers of color-coded data showing property lines, improvements, permits, and violations. "Look at this. The entrance is off the plat by 8 feet. The community garden is on your land, but there's more. The pool house they built last year, 3 feet over the setback line, no variance. The walking trail crosses 2 drainage easements without county approval. Karren's been cutting corners for years." I studied the map, seeing the development the way Jennifer saw it, as data and relationships and violations. "This is incredible. It's evidence. If it comes to trial, this kind of comprehensive analysis could show a pattern of behavior. Not just one mistake, but systematic disregard for proper procedure." She looked at me. "But I need to be careful how I share it. Officially, I'm just the GIS tech. Unofficially, I'm helping you because I believe you're right." We kissed for the first time that night, sitting in her car under the streetlights. It was gentle and careful, two people who'd been alone for a while learning how to be close to someone again. The HOA's counterclaim hearing was scheduled for January 8th in front of Judge Lawrence Morton. Marcus Webb prepped me for 2 hours the day before. "The judge is going to want to see clear evidence that your boundaries are where you say they are," Webb explained. "We'll present Rodriguez's survey, the original 1998 survey, and the county plat map. Hutchins will argue that the HOA relied on professional advice and acted in good faith. We'll demand he produce that professional. When he can't, his case falls apart." The courtroom was small and overheated. Karren Dunmore sat at the defense table with Hutchins, flanked by 2 other board members. She stared at me with undisguised hostility. Jennifer was in the back row, there to testify about the county records if needed. Judge Morton was in his 70s, a no-nonsense former prosecutor who'd been on the bench for 30 years. He reviewed the filings, then looked at both attorneys. "Let's cut through this quickly. Mr. Webb, your client claims the HOA moved his boundary stakes. What's your evidence?" Webb presented Rodriguez's survey report, complete with photos of the buried original pins and the improperly placed new stakes. He showed the measurements, the discrepancies, and the timeline. Hutchins objected repeatedly, but the judge shut him down. "This is a preliminary hearing, counselor. I'm evaluating evidence, not ruling on admissibility. You'll have your chance." When Webb finished, the judge turned to Hutchins. "Your client filed a counterclaim alleging Mr. Oakes is harassing the HOA. Based on what I've seen so far, he's pursuing a legitimate property dispute. What am I missing?" Hutchins stood, adjusted his tie. "Your Honor, the HOA conducted a professional survey before undertaking any improvements. That survey confirmed the boundaries and guided their actions. Mr. Oakes's claims are based on a misunderstanding of where those boundaries are." "Then produce the survey. Who conducted it? When? Where's the report?" Hutchins hesitated. "We're working to obtain those records." "You don't have them. You filed a counterclaim, and you don't have the survey report that supposedly justifies your client's actions." Judge Morton looked incredulous. "Mr. Hutchins, I'm giving you 2 weeks to produce that survey report and the identity of the surveyor who conducted it. If you can't, I'm dismissing your counterclaim and we're moving forward with Mr. Oakes's quiet title action." 2 weeks later, Hutchins filed a motion to withdraw the counterclaim. He never produced the survey report because it didn't exist. "No licensed surveyor had ever told the HOA to move my stakes. Someone, almost certainly Karren or someone acting on her orders, had just done it. With the counterclaim dismissed, we moved forward with the quiet title action. The trial was set for March 15th. In the meantime, Detective Paulson finished her investigation. She called me on February 2nd. "We've concluded our investigation into the survey tampering," she said. "Based on the evidence, we're recommending felony charges against Karren Dunmore for intentional removal and alteration of boundary markers under Idaho Code 18-702. The prosecutor's reviewing it now." "What kind of evidence did you find?" "Text messages between Miss Dunmore and a landscaping company, discussing the removal of old stakes and installation of new ones. Email correspondence where she told the company not to worry about the exact measurements, that she'd handle it. And testimony from the landscaping foreman that Miss Dunmore personally supervised the stake moving and told him the new position was correct." Paulson sounded satisfied. She documented her own crime. The charges were filed on February 12th. Karren Dunmore was arrested at her home and released on $10,000 bail. The news spread through Clearwater Ridge like wildfire. By that evening, there were calls for her resignation from the board. She refused, issuing a statement calling the charges politically motivated and promising to fight them vigorously. But the damage was done. The other board members, facing potential liability and watching the legal bills mount, began to distance themselves. Dennis Plat, the treasurer, resigned on February 20th. 2 other members followed within days. By the first week of March, Karren was the only one left on the board, and the HOA was in chaos. Jennifer and I spent most of February working on the case together. She'd come to my house after work, and we'd spread maps across my dining room table, cross-referencing Plat documents with photos and surveys. It was meticulous, obsessive work, the kind of thing that would bore most people to tears. But for us, It became a shared language. She'd point out a discrepancy in the recorded easement, and I'd match it to a photo showing the actual improvement. We'd trace boundary lines with our fingers, calculating angles and distances, building an irrefutable record of where everything actually was versus where the HOA had built it. "You're good at this," she said one night, looking up from a stack of permit applications. "I'm a carpenter. I'm used to working with measurements and plans. It's more than that. You think spatially. You can see how things fit together," she smiled. "It's attractive." We'd been dating, if you could call it that, for 2 months. Dinners, long phone calls, evenings spent mapping my property dispute. It wasn't conventional romance, but it felt right. We were building something together, not just a legal case but a relationship founded on precision and trust. "I worry about you," I said. "If this goes badly, if the HOA's attorney argues you were biased, that you used county resources to help me. I've been careful. Everything I've done has been on my own time, using publicly available records. Any citizen could request the same information." But she looked concerned. "Still, I know it's a risk. County employees are supposed to be neutral. If it looks like I took sides, there could be consequences. Then maybe you should step back. Let me handle it from here." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm not stepping back." What Karren did wasn't just wrong legally. It was wrong ethically. She treated the Plat like a suggestion, boundaries like obstacles to her vision. If people like her get away with that, the whole system breaks down. I'm not letting that happen. The trial started on March 15th, a cold Tuesday with snow still on the mountains. The courtroom was packed with Clearwater Ridge residents, some supporting me, more worried about what a judgment would mean for their property values and HOA fees. Judge Morton had moved the case to the larger courtroom to accommodate everyone. Marcus Webb laid out our case methodically. He presented the original 1998 survey, Tom Rodriguez's 2024 survey, and Jennifer's certified county plat map. He showed photos of the buried iron pins, the improperly placed stakes, and the HOA garden occupying my land. Then he dropped the hammer. "Your Honor, during discovery, we've documented that the Clearwater Ridge entrance, including the welcome sign, stone pillars, and landscaping, is entirely off the recorded plat. The northern pillar sits on county right-of-way, and the southern pillar, along with approximately 60% of the structure, sits on Mr. Oakes's property. The HOA never obtained permission to build on either location, and they never filed for the required building permits." He displayed Jennifer's map on the courtroom screen, showing the entrance overlay on the official plat. The discrepancy was obvious and damning. Murmurs ran through the courtroom. Hutchins stood to object. "Your Honor, the entrance has been in place since 2021. Surely the doctrine of adverse possession or implied easement would apply." "Adverse possession requires 10 years in Idaho," Webb countered. "It's been less than 4. And there's no implied easement because the use was never open or notorious to Mr. Oakes. The entrance was built while he was a passive member of the HOA, before the boundary dispute arose. He had no reason to question its placement." Judge Morton studied the map. "Miss Garrett, you're the county GIS technician who prepared this overlay." Jennifer stood from the gallery. "Yes, Your Honor." "Can you confirm that this represents the official recorded plat?" "Yes, Your Honor. The plat was recorded in 2019 as instrument number 2019-4782. The boundaries shown here are the legal boundaries as recorded by Bonner County. The entrance structure, as shown in the current satellite imagery and as surveyed by Mr. Rodriguez, does not align with those boundaries. And you're confident in the accuracy of your overlay?" "Yes, Your Honor." Our GIS system is accurate to within 2 inches, and I personally verified the data against the recorded plat documents and Mr. Rodriguez's survey. Hutchins tried to attack her credibility, suggesting she'd been working with me improperly. Jennifer remained calm. I provided Mr. Oakes with certified copies of public records, which any citizen can request. I also provided GPS verification of his property corners using county equipment, which is a standard service we offer to property owners. All of my work was documented and proper. The judge wasn't buying Hutchins's argument. "Counselor, it sounds like Miss Garrett did her job, unless you have evidence that she falsified records or acted improperly. We're moving on." The trial lasted 3 days. Webb called Rodriguez to testify about the survey tampering, presented the text messages and emails Detective Paulson had uncovered, and systematically demolished every argument Hutchins made. The HOA's position boiled down to claiming they'd acted in good faith, but without any surveyor to back that up. It was just words. On the 3rd day, Webb called me to testify. I explained how I'd discovered the moved stakes, how I'd found the buried iron pins, and how the HOA had built on my land without permission. Hutchins tried to make me seem vindictive, like I was punishing the HOA over a petty dispute. "Isn't it true that you're only pursuing this case because you have a personal grudge against Miss Dunmore?" he asked. "No. I'm pursuing it because someone stole my land. If Karren Dunmore hadn't moved my stakes, we wouldn't be here." "But you're demanding that the HOA move their entire entrance, which will cost tens of thousands of dollars. That seems disproportionate to the 6 feet in dispute." "The entrance is on my property. I didn't put it there. The HOA did, without asking and without checking the plat." "That's not my problem. That's theirs." Judge Morton issued his ruling on March 22nd. It was thorough, detailed, and unambiguous. The original 1998 survey was correct. The boundary stakes had been illegally moved. The HOA garden occupied my land. And the Clearwater Ridge entrance was built partially on my property and partially on county right-of-way, in violation of the recorded plat and without proper permits. "The plat is the legal description of the property," Judge Morton wrote in his decision. "It is recorded, certified, and binding. Physical structures, no matter how expensive or prominent, do not supersede the recorded plat. The HOA built their entrance in the wrong location, and they must now relocate it to conform with the legal boundaries." The judge ordered the HOA to remove all improvements from my western strip, restore the land to its original condition, and pay me $24,000 in damages for the value of the land they'd occupied and the timber they'd removed to build the garden. He also ordered them to relocate the entrance within 90 days or face additional penalties. Karren Dunmore's criminal trial was scheduled for May. She'd resigned from the HOA board in late March after the civil judgment, facing pressure from the remaining residents and mounting legal bills. The new board, led by Margaret Sullivan, was trying to pick up the pieces. They held a special assessment to raise funds for moving the entrance, and they hired an actual surveyor to establish clear boundaries for all the HOA's common areas. I worked with them, surprisingly. The new board was apologetic and cooperative, acknowledging that Karren had acted recklessly and without oversight. They asked if I'd be willing to grant an easement for part of the entrance if they rebuilt it properly, on their own land, but designed to minimize the visual impact of the relocation. I agreed, with conditions. They'd pay for a permanent survey marker at every corner of my property. They'd donate $5,000 to the County Land Records Preservation Fund, and they'd fire Bradley Hutchins and stop fighting me on the damages. They accepted every term. Jennifer and I watched the entrance removal on a Saturday in April. A crew with excavators dug up the stone pillars, dismantled the wooden sign, and removed all the landscaping. It took them 6 hours. When they finished, there was just bare ground where the showcase entrance had been. "How do you feel?" Jennifer asked. "Like I won, but not in a way that feels great. They needed to learn a lesson, but I wish it hadn't required all this." "You did the right thing. They stole from you and you fought back using the law. That's how it's supposed to work." The new entrance was installed 3 weeks later, properly surveyed and positioned entirely on HOA land, 8 feet south of where the old one had stood. It was smaller, more modest, but it was legal. The stone pillars were set on recorded boundaries. The sign was anchored in the right place. Everything was measured and verified and documented. Karren Dunmore pled guilty to felony survey tampering on May 18th. The prosecutor offered her a deal: 1 year probation, restitution to me for my legal fees, and a permanent prohibition from serving on any HOA board in Idaho. She took it. The alternative was a trial and potential jail time. At her sentencing hearing, she stood before Judge Morton and read a prepared statement. "I made a serious error in judgment," she said, her voice flat. "I believed I was acting in the best interests of the community, but I violated the law and Mr. Oakes's property rights. I accept responsibility for my actions." She didn't look at me. After the hearing, she left the courthouse and, as far as I know, left Bonner County entirely. Someone told me she moved to Arizona. I didn't follow up. She was done being part of my story. Jennifer and I spent that summer rebuilding my western fence line, setting it exactly on the surveyed boundary. We worked side by side, digging post holes, stretching wire, planting native shrubs along the restored strip. The work was hot and physical, and by the end of each day we were exhausted and filthy and happy. "I never thought I'd find someone who wanted to spend their summer moving fence posts," I said one evening, washing dirt off my hands with the hose. "I never thought I'd find someone who cared about property lines as much as I do," she replied, smiling. "Guess we're both lucky." We were more than lucky. Over those months, working on the fence and dealing with the aftermath of the case, we'd built something that went beyond attraction or shared interest. We understood each other's silences, the way we both needed order and precision, the satisfaction of getting something exactly right. She'd started staying over most nights, her surveying equipment in my garage, her maps spread across my dining room table. By October, she'd moved in officially. We never made a big deal of it, just gradually merged our lives until it felt strange when she wasn't there. She kept her county job, and I kept taking carpentry contracts, and in the evenings we'd sit on my porch and look out at the mountains, and the fence line that marked exactly where my property ended and the rest of the world began. The HOA stabilized under Margaret Sullivan's leadership. They hired a competent management company, established proper procedures for all improvements, and began rebuilding trust with the residents. Paul Chen told me the monthly meetings were actually productive now, focused on maintenance and real issues instead of Karren's pet projects and vendettas. "You did us a favor," Paul said at the grocery store one day. "We needed someone to stand up to her. It just took losing an entrance and a felony conviction to make it happen." Detective Paulson closed her file on the case in November, noting that the investigation had resulted in a conviction and restitution. She called to let me know. "Cases like this remind me why I do this job," she said. "Property crimes might not make headlines, but they matter to the people affected. You stood up for yourself, and the system worked the way it's supposed to." Jennifer and I were married the following June at the Bonner County Courthouse. Just a small ceremony with my kids, a few friends, and Judge Morton officiating. He'd agreed to do it when Jennifer asked, saying he liked seeing a case that ended with something positive. "Most of what I deal with is failure and conflict," he said at the reception afterward. "It's nice to see two people who found each other because they both cared enough to fight for what was right." We honeymooned in Montana, hiking in Glacier National Park and camping under skies so clear you could see the Milky Way. Jennifer brought maps, of course, topographic charts and trail guides that she studied with the same intensity she'd brought to the property dispute. I watched her trace elevation lines with her finger and thought about how lucky I was to have found someone who saw the world the way I did, as something that could be measured and understood and protected. When we got back to Sandpoint, we drove past the Clearwater Ridge entrance on our way home. The new sign looked good, weathered a bit by a year of mountain weather, and the landscaping had filled in. You couldn't tell by looking that the whole thing had been moved, that the original entrance had sat 8 feet too far north, straddling boundaries it never should have crossed. But Jennifer and I knew. We knew because we'd measured it, documented it, and fought to make it right. We knew because we understood that property lines weren't just marks on a map. They were promises, agreements between people that said this is yours and that is mine, and neither of us gets to change it just because we feel like it. I pulled into our driveway, past the western fence line that now sat exactly where it was supposed to be, and looked at the 6 feet of land that had started everything. It was planted with native grasses and wildflowers now, a small garden that Jennifer had designed. Nothing fancy, just a restoration of what had been there before anyone tried to steal it. "Welcome home," Jennifer said, taking my hand as we walked toward the house. Home. 3 acres in Bonner County, precisely measured and legally protected, with a fence that marked the boundary and a woman who understood why that mattered. They'd moved my stakes to steel 6 feet, and in fighting back, I'd moved their entire entrance off the county plat and found someone who loved maps as much as she loved me. Some people might call that disproportionate. Judge Morton had called it justice. I just called it fair. They tried to steal my land. Instead, I'd taken back what was mine and built a life with someone who understood that boundaries, properly drawn and properly defended, were what made everything else possible. The law had worked. The plat had governed. And in the end, everything was exactly where it was supposed to be.